Chapter 3. Jonathan Harker's Journal. Continued. When I found that I was a prisoner, a sort of wild feeling came over me. I rushed up and down the stairs, trying every door and peering out every window I could find. But after a little, the conviction of my helplessness overpowered all of the feelings. When I look back after a few hours, I think I must have been mad for the time, for I behaved much as a rat does in a trap. When, however, the conviction had come to me that I was helpless, I sat down quietly as I ever done in anything in my entire life, and began to think of what best to be done. I was thinking still, and yet have come to no definitive conclusion. For one thing is certain, that there is no use making my ideas known to the Count. He knows well that I am imprisoned, and yet he has done it himself, and has doubtless his own motives for it, for he would only deceive me if I fully trusted him with the facts. So far as I can see, my only plan would be to keep my knowledge and my fears to myself, and my eyes open. I am, I know, either being deceived, like a baby, by my own fears, or else I am in desperate straits. If the latter is to be so, I need and shall need all my brains to get through with this. I hardly come to this conclusion when I heard the great door below me shut, and knew that the Count had returned. He had not at once come to the library, so I cautiously went to my own room and found him making the bed. This was odd, but only confirmed what I had all along thought, that there were no servants in the house. When I saw him later through the chink of the hinges of the door, laying the table in the dining room, I was assured of it. For if he does himself all the menial offices, surely it is proof that there is no one else to do them. This gave me a fright, for if there's no one else in the castle, it must have been the Count himself who was the driver of the coach that brought me here. This is a terrible thought, for if so, what does it mean that he could control the wolves as he did by only holding up his hand in silence? How was it that all the people in Stoker'S and on the coach had some terrible fear for me? What meant the giving of the crucifix, of the garlic, of the white rose, of the mountain ash? Bless that good woman who hung the crucifix round my neck for it, for it is a comfort and a strength for me whenever I touch it. It is an odd thing, which I have been taught to regard with disfavor, and as idolatrous should be in a time of loneliness and trouble be of help. Is it that there is something in the essence of the thing itself? Or that it is a medium, a tangible help in conveying memories of sympathy and comfort? Sometime, if it may be, I must examine this matter and try to make my mind up about it. In the meantime, I must find out all I can about Count Dracula, as it may help me to understand. Tonight, he may talk of himself, if I turn the conversation that way. I must be very careful, however, not to awake his suspicion. Midnight. I had a long talk with the Count. I asked him a few questions on Transylvanian history, and he warmed to the subject wonderfully. In his speaking of things and of people, and especially of battles, he spoke as if he had been present at all of them. This he afterwards explained by saying that to a Bodyar, the pride of his house, and the name is his own pride, that their glory is his glory, that their fate is his fate. Whenever he spoke of his house, he always said we, and spoke almost in the plural, like a king speaking. I wish I could put down all that he said exactly as he said it, for to me it was most fascinating. It seemed to have in it a whole history of the country. He grew excited as he spoke, and walked about the room pulling at his great white moustache, and grasping at anything which he could lay his hands, as though he would crush it by main strength alone. One thing he said which I shall put down as nearly as I can, for it tells in its way the story of his race. We Skelelises have a right to be proud, for in our veins flows the blood of many brave races who have fought as the lion fights for lordship. Here in the whirlpool of European races, the Ugric tribe bore down from Iceland the fighting spirit which Thor and Woden gave to them, which their berserkers displayed to such fell intent on the seaboards of Europe, and of Asia, and Africa too, till the peoples thought they were the werewolves themselves had come. Here, too, when they came, they found the Huns, whose warlike fury had swept the earth like a leaving flame, till the dying peoples held that in their veins ran the blood of old witches who were expelled from Scythia, had mated with the devils of the desert. Fools! Fools! What devil or witch was ever so great that Attila, whose blood is in these veins? He held up his arms. Is it any wonder that we were a conquering race, that we were proud? When the Magyar, the Lombard, the Avar, the Bulgar, or the Turk poured his thousands on our frontiers, we drove them back. Is it strange that when Archibald and his legions swept through the Hungarian fatherland, he found us here when he reached the frontier, that they forgot us who competed there? And when the Hungarian flood swept eastward and the Stoker'S were claimed as kindreds of the victorious Magyars, and to us for centuries were trusted with guarding the frontiers of Turkey land, and more than that, endless duty of the frontier guard. For as the Turks say, water sleeps, an enemy is sleepless. Who more gladly would have thought throughout the four nations received the bloody sword, or at its warlike call flocked quicker to the standard of the king? When was redeemed that great shame of my nation, the shame of Kosovo, when the flags of Valach and the Magyar went down beneath the crescent? Who was it but one of my own race, who was voivode, crossed the Danube and beat the Turk on his own ground? This was a Dracula indeed! Woe was it that his own unworthy brother, when he had fallen, sold his people to the Turk, and brought the shame of slavery upon them. Was it not this Dracula indeed, who inspired others of his own race in a latter age, again and again brought his forces over the great river into Turkey land, who, when he was beaten back, came again and again and again? Though he had come alone from this bloody field where his troops had been slaughtered, since he knew he alone could ultimately triumph. They said he thought only of himself. Bah! What good are peasants without a leader? When ends the war without a brain and heart to conduct it? Again, when, after the battle of the Mohacs, we threw off the Hungarian yoke, we of the Dracula blood were amongst their leaders, for our spirit would not brook that we were not free. Ah, young sir, the Stoker'S and the Dracula in their hearts, their brains, and their swords can boast a record that mushrooms grow like the Habsburgs and the Romanovs could never reach. The warlike days are over. Blood is too precious a thing these days, of dishonorable peace, and the glories of the great races are a tale that is told. It was by this time close to morning, and we went to bed. Memo, this diary seems horribly like the beginning of the Arabian Nights, for everything has to break off at cock, and like the ghost of Hamlet, or like the ghost of Hamlet's father. 12th May. Let me begin with facts, bare menagerie facts, verified by books and figures, and of which there could be no doubt. I must not confuse them with experiences which have to rest on my own observations, or my memory of them. Last evening, when the Count came from his room, he began to ask me questions of legal matters, and on the doings of certain kind of businesses. I had spent the day wearily over books, and simply to keep my mind occupied, went over some of the other matters I had examined at Lincoln's Inn. There was a certain method in the Count's inquiries, so I shall try to put them down in sequence. My knowledge may somehow or sometime be useful to me. First, he asked me if a man in England might have 2 solicitors or more. I told him he may have a dozen if he wished, but it would not be wise to have more than one solicitor engaged in one transaction, as only one could act at any one time, and that to change would be certainly a militant against his interest. He seemed thoroughly to understand, and went on to ask if there was any practical difficulty in having one man attend to, say, banking, and another to look after shipping, in case local help was needed in a place far from home from the banking solicitor. I asked him to explain fully, so that I may not by chance mislead him, so he said, "I shall illustrate. Your friend and mine, Mr. Peter Hawkins, from under the shadow of your beautiful cathedral at Exeter, which is far from London, buys me, through your good self, my place in London. Good. Now, here let me say frankly, lest you think it strange that I have sought the services of one who is so far from England instead of someone resident there, that my motive was that no local interests might serve save my wish only, and as one of England residents might perhaps have some purpose of himself or friend to serve. I went thus afield to seek my agent, whose labours should be only to my interests. Now, suppose who of much of my affairs wish to ship goods, say, to Newcastle, or Durham, or Harwich, or Dover, might it not be that it could be more ease to be done by consigning one to these ports? I answered, certainly it would be most easy, but we solicitors have a system of agency, one for the other, so the local work could be done locally on instruction from any solicitor, so that the client, simply placing himself in the hands of one man, could have his wishes carried out by him without furthermost trouble. But, he said, I could be at the liberty to direct them myself. Is that not so? Of course, I replied, and such is often done by men of business who do not like the whole of their affairs to be known by any one person. Good, he said, and went on to ask about the means of making consignments and the forms that need to be gone through, and of all sorts of difficulties that might arise, but by forethought could be guarded against. I explained that all these things to him to the best of my ability, and he certainly left me under the impression that he would have made a wonderful solicitor, for there was nothing that he did not think of or foresee. For a man who has never been in the country, and who did not evidently do so much in the way of business, his knowledge and acumen were wonderful. When he had satisfied himself on these points of which he had spoken, and I had verified all that as well that could be found in books available, he stood up and said, "Have you written since your first letter to our friend Mr. Peter Hawkins, or to any other?" It was with some bitterness in my heart that I answered that I had not. As of yet I had not seen any opportunity of sending letters to anyone. "Then write now, my good friend," he said, laying a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Write to our friend, and to any other, and say, if it will please you, that you shall stay with me until a month from now." "Do you wish for me to stay so long?" I asked. My heart grew cold at the thought. "I desire it much. Nay, I will take no refusal. When your master, employer, what you will, engaged that someone should come on his behalf, it would be understood that my needs were only to be consulted. I have not stinted, is it not so?" What could I do but bow acceptance? It was Mr. Hawkins' interests, not mine, and I had to think of him, not myself. And besides, while Count Dracula was speaking, there was that in his eyes and in his bearing that made me remember that I was a prisoner, and that if I wished it, I could have no choice. The Count saw his victory in my brow and his mastery in the trouble of my face, for he began to at once use them, but in his own smooth, resistless way. "I pray you, my good young friend, that you will not discourse of things other than business in your letters. It would be doubtlessly please your friends to know that you are well, and that you look forward to getting home to them. Is this not so?" As he spoke, he laid me 3 sheets of notepaper and 3 envelopes. They were all of the thinnest foreign post, and looking at them, then him, and noticing his quiet smile with that sharp canine teeth lying over his red underlip, I understood it as well as if he had spoken that I should be careful what I wrote, for he would be able to read it. So I determined to write only formal notes now, but to write fully to Mr. Hawkins in secret, and also to Mina, for to her I could write in shorthand, which would puzzle the Count if he did see it. When I had written the 2 letters, I sat quietly reading a book whilst the Count wrote several notes, referring as he wrote it to several books on the table. Then he took up my 2 and placed them with his own, and putting by his writing materials, as which the instant the door behind him closed, I leaned over and looked at the letters, which were face down on the table. I felt no compunction in doing so, for under the circumstances, I felt I should protect myself in every way I could. One of the letters was directed to Samuel F. Billington, No. 7, The Crescent, Whitby. Another to Herr Leutner, Vanna. The third was to Consenco, London, and the fourth was to Henrik Koppenstock and Bullrith, bankers, Budapest. The second and fourth were unsealed. I was just about to look at them when the door handle suddenly moved. I sank back at my seat, just having enough time to replace the letters that as they had been and resume my book before the Count, holding still another letter in his hand, entered the room. He took up the letters on the table and stamped them carefully, and then turning to me said, "I trust you will forgive me, but I have much work to do in private this evening. You will, I hope, find all things as you wish." At the door he turned, and at a moment's pause he said, "Let me advise you, my dear young friend, let me warn you with all seriousness that should you leave these rooms, you will not by any chance go to sleep in any particular part of the castle. It is old and has many memories, and there are bad dreams for those who sleep unwisely. Be warned. Should sleep now or ever overcome you, or be like to do, then haste to your own chamber, and to these rooms, for your rest should be then safe. But if you be not careful in this respect, then..." He finished his speech in a gruesome way, for he motioned with his hands as if he was washing them. I quite understood. My only doubt as to whether any dream could be more terrible than the unnatural, horrible net of gloom and mystery that seems to be closing in around me. Later, I endorse the last words written, but this time there is no doubt in question. I shall not fear to sleep in any other place where he is not. I place the crucifix over the head of my bed. I imagine the rest is thus freer from dreams, and thus it shall remain. When he left me, I went to my room. After a little while, not hearing any sound, I came out and went up the stone stair where I could look out towards the south. There was some sense of freedom in the vast expanse, inaccessible though it is to me as compared to the narrow darkness of the courtyard. Looking out on this, I felt that I was indeed in a prison, and I seemed to want to breathe in the fresh air, as though it was the night. I began to feel this nocturne existence tell on me. It was destroying my nerve. I started at my own shadow, and am full of all sorts of horrible imaginings. God knows there is ground for my terrible fear in this accursed place. I looked out over the beautiful expanse, bathed in the soft yellow moonlight, till it was almost as light as day. In the soft light, the distant hills became melted, and the shadows of the valley and the gorges of velvety blackness. The mere beauty seemed to cheer me. There was peace and comfort in every breath I drew. As I leaned from the window, my eye was caught by something moving a story below me, and somewhat to my left, where I imagined from the order of the rooms that the windows of the Count's own room would look out. The window by which I stood was tall and deep, stone molten, and where weather-worn was still complete. But it was evidently many a day since the case had been there. I drew back behind the stonework and looked out carefully. What I saw was the Count's head coming out from the window. I did not see the face, but I knew the man by the neck and the movement of his back and arms. In any case, I could not mistake his hands, which I had so many opportunities to study. I was at first interested and somewhat amused, for it was wonderful how small a matter will interest and amuse a man when he is a prisoner. But my very feelings changed to repulsion and terror when I saw the whole man slowly emerge from the window and began to crawl down the castle wall over that dreadful abyss, face down, with his cloak spreading out around him like great wings. At first I couldn't believe my eyes. I thought it was some trick of the moonlight, some weird effect of shadow, but I kept looking, and it could be no delusion. I saw the fingers and toes grasping the corners of the stone, worn clearly of the mortar by the stress of years, and by thus using every projection and inequality move downward by considerable speed, like a lizard moves along the wall. What manner of man is this? Or what manner of creature is it that resembles a man? I feel the dread of this horrible place overpowering me. I am in fear, in awful fear, and there is no escape for me. I am encompassed by the terrors that I dare not think of. May 15th. Once more I have seen the Count go out in his lizard fashion. He moved downwards along a sidelong way, some 100 feet down and a good deal to the left. He vanished into some hole or window. When his head disappeared, I leaned out to try and see more, but without avail. The distance was too great to allow a proper angle of sight. I knew he had left the castle now, and the thought to use the opportunity to explore more than I dared to do so yet. I went back into the room, and taking a lamp, I tried all the doors. They were all locked, as I expected, and the locks were comparatively new. But I went down the stone stairs to the hall where I entered originally. I found I could pull back the bolts easily enough and unhook the great chains, but the door itself was locked, and the key was gone. The key must be in the Count's room. I must watch should his door be unlocked, so I may get it and escape. I went on to make a thorough examination of the various stairs and passages, and to try the doors that opened from them. 1 or 2 small rooms near the hall were open, but there was nothing in them to see except old furniture, dusty with age and moth-eaten. At last, however, I found one door at the top of the stairway, which, though it seemed to be locked, gave way under little pressure. I tried it harder, and found it was not really locked, but that the resistance came from the fact that the hinges had fallen somewhat, and the heavy door rested on the floor. Here was an opportunity which I might not have again, so I exerted myself, and with many efforts forced it back so that I could enter. I was in a wing of the castle, further from the right in the rooms that I knew, and the story further down. From the windows I could see that the suite of rooms lay along the south of the castle, the windows of the end room looking out both west and south. From the latter side, as well as the former, there was a great precipice. The castle was built on the corner of a great rock, so that there were 3 sides that were quite impregnable, and the great windows were placed here where sling and bow or culverin could not reach, and consequently light and comfort impossible to position, which had to be guarded, was secured. To the west was a great valley, and then, rising away, jagged mountain fastnesses, rising on peak to peak. The sheer rock studded with the mountain ash and thorn, which roots clung in cracks and crevices and crannies of stone. This was evidently the position of the castle occupied by the ladies of bygone days, for the furniture had a more air of comfort than any I had ever seen. The windows were curtainless, and the yellow moonlight flooding through the the panes, enabling one to see even colors, whilst it softened the wealth of dust which lay all over and disguised in some manner the ravages of time and the moth. My lamp seemed to be of little effort in the brilliant moonlight, but I was glad to have it with me, for there is a dread loneliness in the place that chilled my heart and made my nerves tremble. Still, it was better than living alone in the rooms which I had come to hate from the presence of the Count, and after trying a little to school my nerves, I found a quiet solitude had come over me. Here I am, sitting at an oak desk, where in old times possibly some fair lady sat to pen, with much thought and many blushes, her ill-spent love letter, and writing in my diary in shorthand all that had happened since I had closed it last. It is 19th century up to date with a vengeance, and yet, unless my senses deceive me, the old centuries had, and have, powers of their own, which mere modernity cannot kill. Later, morning of 16th May. God preserve my sanity, for it to this I am reduced. Safety and the assurance of safety are things of the past. Whilst I live on here, there is but one thing to hope for, that I may not go mad, if indeed I be not mad already. If I be sane, then surely it is maddening to think that all of the foul things that lurk in this hateful place the Count is the least dreadful to me, that to him alone I can look for safety, even though this be only whilst I serve his purpose. Great God, merciful God, let me be calm, for out of that way lies madness indeed. I began to get new lights on certain things which have puzzled me. Upon now, I never quite knew what Shakespeare meant when he made Hamlet say, "My tablets, quick, my tablets, 'tis meet I put them down," etc. For now, feeling as though my own brain were unhinged, or as if the shock had come which must end in its undoing, I turned to my diary for repose. The habit of entering accurately must help to soothe me. The Count's mysterious warning to me at the time, it frightens me more now than when I think of it, for in the future he has come a fearful hold upon me. I shall fear to doubt what he may say. When I had written in my diary, and had fortunately replaced the book and pen in my pocket, I felt sleepy. The Count's warning came to my mind, but I took pleasure in disobeying it. The sense of sleep was upon me, and with it the obstinacy which brings sleep as an outrider. The soft moonlight soothed, and the wide expanse without gave a sense of freedom which refreshed me. I demanded not to return tonight to the gloomy haunted rooms, but to sleep here, where of old ladies sat and sung and lived sweet lives, whilst their gentle breasts were sad for their menfolk away in the midst of remorseless wars. I drew a great couch out of its place in the corner, and so that I could look at the lovely view to the east and south, and unthinking of and uncaring of the dust, composed myself to sleep. I supposed I must have fallen asleep. I hope so, but I fear, for all that followed was strangely real, so real that sitting here now in this brood, full sunlight of the morning, I cannot in the least believe it was all sleep. I was not alone. The room was the same, unchanged in any way since I came to it. I could see along the floor in the brilliant moonlight my own footsteps marked where I had disturbed the long accumulation of dust. In the moonlight opposed to me were 3 young women, ladies by their dress and manner. I thought at the time I must be dreaming when I saw them, for though the moonlight was behind them, they threw no shadow on the floor. They came to me and looked at me for some time, and then whispered together. 2 were dark and had aquiline noses like the Count, and great dark piercing eyes that seemed to be almost red when contrasted with the pale moonlight. The other was fair as can be, with great waving masses of golden hair and eyes like pale sapphires. I seemed somehow to know her face, and to know that it had in connection with some dreamy fear, but I could not recall at the moment how or where. All 3 had brilliant white teeth that shone like pearls against the ruby that was their voluptuous lips. There was something about them that made me uneasy, some longing, and at the same time some deadly fear. I felt my heart a wicked burning desire that they would kiss me with those red lips. It was not good to note this down, lest some day it should meet Mina's eyes and cause her some pain, but it is the truth. They whispered together, and then They all three laughed, such a silvery musical laugh, as great as though the sound could have come through the swiftness of human lips. It was like the tangible, tingling sweetness of water glasses when played by a cunning hand. The fair girl shook her head consciously, and the others urged her on. One said, "Go on. You are first, and we shall follow. Yours is right to begin." The other added, "He is young and strong. There are kisses for us all." I lay quiet, looking out from under my eyelashes in an agony of delightful anticipation. The fair girl advanced and bent over to me till I could feel the movement of her breath upon me. Sweet it was in one sense, honey-sweet, and sent the same tingle through the nerves as her voice, but with a bitter underlying, the sweet, a bitter offensiveness, as one smells in blood. I was afraid to raise my eyelids, but looked out and saw perfectly under the lashes. The girl went on her knees and bent over me, simply gloating. There was a deliberate voluptuousness which was both thrilling and repulsive, and as she arched her neck, she actually licked her lips like an animal, till I could see in the moonlight the moisture shine on the scarlet-red lips and on the red tongue as it lapped on the white, sharp teeth. Lower and lower her head went as the lips went below the range of my mouth and chin and seemed to fasten on my throat. Then she paused, and I could hear the churning sound of her tongue as it licked her teeth and lips, and I could feel the hot breath on my neck. And then the skin of my throat began to tingle as one's flesh does when the hand that is to tickle it approaches nearer. Nearer. I could feel the soft, shivering touch of the lips on the super-sensitive skin of my throat, and the hard, dense of two sharp teeth touching and pausing there. I closed my eyes in languorous ecstasy and waited with beating heart. But at that very instant, another sensation swept through me as quick as lightning. I was conscious of the presence of the Count and of his being as he lapped in a storm of fury. As my eyes opened involuntarily, I saw his strong hand grasp the slender neck of the fair woman and with giant's power drew it back. The blue eyes transformed with fury, the white teeth champing with rage, and the fair cheeks blazed red with passion. But the Count! Never did I imagine such wrath and fury, even from the demons of the pit itself. His eyes were positively blazing. The red light in them were lurid, as if the flames of hellfire blazed behind them. His face was deathly pale, and the lines of it were hardened like drawn wires. The thick eyebrows had met over the nose, now seemed like a heavy bar of white-hot metal. With a fierce sweep of his arms, he hurled the woman from him, and then motioned to the others as though he were beating them back. It was the same impetuous glare that I had seen him use on the wolves. In a voice, though low and almost through a whisper, seemed to cut through the air and ring through the room, he said, "How dare you touch him, any of you? How dare you cast eyes upon him which I had forbidden? Back, I tell you all. This man belongs to me. Beware how you meddle with him, or you will have to deal with me." The fair girl, with a laugh of ribald coquetry, turned to him, answer, "You yourself never loved. You have never loved." On this the other women joined, and in such a mirthless, hot, soulless laughter rang throughout the room, as though it made me faint to hear. It seemed like the pleasure of fiends. Then the Count turned, after looking at my face attentively, said in a soft whisper, "Yes, I too can love. You yourself can tell it from the past, is that not so? Well, I promise you that when I am done with him, you shall kiss him at your will. Now go! I must awaken him, for there is much work to be done." "Are we to have nothing tonight?" said one of them, with a low laugh as she pointed to the bag in which she had thrown upon the floor, and which moved as if there was something living thing within it. For the answer he nodded his head. One of the women jumped forth and opened it. If my ears did not deceive me, there was a gasp and a low wail as if from a half-smothered child. The women closed round, while I was aghast with horror, but as I looked they disappeared, and with them that dreadful bag. There was no door near them, and they could not have passed me without me noticing. They simply seemed to fade into the rays of the moonlight and pass out through the window, for I could see them outside the dim, shadowy forms for a moment before they vanished away entirely. Then the horror overcame me, and I sank into unconsciousness.